Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Welcome to our special Scary Friday Cryptid extravaganza, over an hour long. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. We've got an all-new Dogman story coming up first, and we call it Dogman Was a Pain in My Neck. Dear Scary Stories, I want to tell you a story about seeing Dogman and knowing when he was around even when I couldn't see him. But, ironically, it all starts in New York City on the Upper West Side. I was walking down Columbus Avenue one day when a car jumped the curb, knocking another person onto me and causing me to fall and injure my neck. It took some time to really heal, and I couldn't do my job as well as I had before, at least in my opinion. I had been saving up for retirement for some time, so I decided to go for it. I quit work and got a small place in the country, subletting my city apartment out to help me cover my expenses. The small home I got was really very tiny, but I live alone, so that's fine. It had some backyard land behind it and was situated within walking distance to a forest with a large stream running through it. My little slice of heaven. I kept in touch with my friends in the city online and didn't really feel lonely at all. Soon, my neck only hurt when it rained, and I was beginning to take a few freelance jobs here and there online, starting to return to work in a part-time way. One day, a thunderstorm was predicted on the weather, and my neck ached like the injury was new again. Well, not that bad, but it hurt worse than it had in months, and I was really sad, thinking I was suffering a setback. Once the weather subsided, though, so did the neck pain, and I came to understand it was weather-related. It would come and go when the rain came and went. So, one night at around 2 or 3 a.m., when I woke up with my neck aching, I figured that meant it was going to rain soon. I looked out my bedroom window at the night sky, but I could see the stars. There wasn't a cloud in that sky, and it was warm and dry. I would have shrugged my shoulders, but that would have made my neck hurt even worse. If I hadn't glanced down before heading to the bathroom for some pain meds, I would have remained confused about what was happening. But I did glance down, and what I saw stunned me to no end. I saw a large, man-like beast covered in dark fur, kneeling on my garden, eating something. I couldn't see what. It was holding whatever it was in both hands or paws in front of it, and it was kneeling there as if praying while eating. The head appeared to have a long animal-like snout and ears on top, not on the side as humans have them. It was so out of place and unexpected that I felt sick to my stomach. That thing didn't belong in my world. I drew the curtains so I couldn't see out anymore. It was childish since I knew that didn't make it go away. I just wanted it to not be there. That was impossible. Everything in my life had always made sense, but that thing was impossible. I remember taking pain meds and telling myself that rain was coming. I had just imagined I saw something out the window because of the neck pain, and that rain was coming. That was the explanation of it all. But deep down, I knew that didn't make any sense. I managed to get back to sleep, and when I woke up and the sun was out, the previous night seemed like some sort of a nightmare. I mostly forgot about it, but nothing like that had ever happened to me before, and I went about life with a sort of unease from then on that I had never experienced before. I just hoped I would never see that thing again and that I could forget about it. As long as I never saw it again, then I wouldn't really have to explain it. But I saw it again. This time it was dusk, and I was sitting out back listening to music on my headphones. My neck ached suddenly and sharply, even though I was leaning back and relaxing. My first reaction was to look at the sky, which was clear, but then I saw it. In the woods, I saw it. And this time, it saw me too. There was a monster in those woods, staring at me in my chair on the back porch. I couldn't judge its expression, but it did not seem friendly. I rose quickly, and it hurt so badly that I thought my head was about to fall off. Somehow, I staggered inside and double-locked the back door. I made it to the bathroom for my meds, but it continued to hurt for another half hour or longer, and I knew exactly why. That thing had not left yet. I went to my bedroom window, which overlooked the backyard. Flinging it open, I shouted in the woods for that thing to go. Leave! Leave me alone! I screamed like a crazy person. Stop tormenting me, I begged. I fell to the floor weeping, and soon the pain began to lessen. It had gone away. But for how long? I got myself together and decided to cancel some freelance gigs that I had agreed to work on that day. I had a brand new reality to adjust to here, and I needed some time to think. Before contacting the people I was supposed to work for, though, I checked my email, and in there was a letter from the guy subletting my apartment. He said he had been offered a job on the West Coast and wanted to know how much of a lurch he'd be leaving me in if he split right away. He said he could afford to pay me another month's rent, but hoped we could work something out since that would be very difficult for him. I told him I could be back in that apartment to stay there myself before sundown, and I started packing within seconds of sending that email. Now I'm free of the Dogman. I'll never see him again or feel that excruciating pain his noxious presence brings with it. Now, when my neck hurts, I know a storm is approaching, and nothing more deadly than that. So I've only got one problem left. Now I have to find someone to sublet the Dogman house. Stay tuned till the end of this show when we have another all-new Dogman story called Backyard Dogman. But first, here's some viewer mail about a very special kind of Dogman, followed by over an hour of the strangest cryptid stories of all time. Dear Scary Stories, my neighbor literally trained his dog to be an upright walking canine. Now he wanders around our neighborhood like a person. The only trouble is that this person is around 7 feet tall on his hind legs, and he has a tendency to like to stand around in the bushes, acting like a peeping Tom, spying on houses in the area. I think he's an Irish wolfhound, but I never asked. It has a kind of shaggy, cute little dog face on this giant dog's body. It's literally the biggest dog I ever saw, and when he's walking around at his full height, I don't see him as cute at all, but sort of intimidating and vaguely threatening. Of course, the owner thinks our fear of his walking Frankenstein is hysterically funny, and he encourages the beast to spend his days touring our private properties and annoying us. Now, I want it clear, this creature does not ever look natural on his hind legs, even though he's been walking on them for years. He kind of wobbles, and he looks exactly like what he is, a dog doing a trick he was trained to do. So he's not intimidating in the way a feral animal would be. It's just that you have to look up to see his face, and he gives you these looks back that say, I could crush you anytime I wanted to. At least that's what his expressions look like to me, but I'm only 5'6", so maybe I'm extra sensitive about how tall this dog is. In my community, that's not especially short though, and I've never heard anyone say they enjoy their visits from the upright walking canid. So it's not a story about a cryptid, and it's not really scary in the normal sense, but I thought somehow you might find this story interesting nonetheless. I wonder how many other dog owners across the country and the world think it's funny to train large canines to walk on their hind legs. I wonder if any dogman sightings might be the result of such eccentric dog owners and their eager to please pets. Just an idea. Keep up the good work. Anonymous in Anonymous Land. Thanks, Anonymous. That's a good story. I never heard of anything like that before. It might not be scary in story form, but I bet it's pretty creepy when you notice a 7-foot-tall dog is peeping in your windows. I know that would scare me even if I knew who the dog was. Okay, next letter. Dear Scary Stories, I'm trying to start a new channel and I want to be just like you. I want to ask your opinion. Should I call the channel Scary Stories, like with 2 E's, or should I call it Scary Stories, like with an I like that? Also, should I do Dogman stories most of the time or all of the time? Please answer quickly, as I have promises from some of the top YouTubers in the scary stories field that they will promote my new channel and I can't wait to get started. Signed, Scary Stories. Dear Scary Stories, how about you don't impersonate my channel, don't copy my name, and don't copy my stories? What's next? Dear Peter and Scary Stories, I think there's a family of Bigfoot living behind our house this summer, but I can't get my father to go out squatching with me to find out more. As of now, I'm banned from going into the forest without adult supervision, but then the adults all refuse to go in the woods to supervise me. How can I ever search those woods under these circumstances? I'm thinking about just going out there alone after my parents go to sleep one night. They wouldn't even know I was gone, and I might find important evidence to prove the existence of Bigfoot in the meantime. That would show them, I think. Plus, it would advance the cause of science. What do you think of my plan? Signed, Science Minded. Okay, dear Science Minded, I can understand your frustration and I empathize with what you're going through. I would not advise going into the forest alone though, as you can get yourself killed that way. The same advice would apply to adults, so I'm not singling you out because of age or anything. Nobody should wander into the forest alone at night, it's just not safe. That's something for people who are trained years to go do. If you want to do that, you can start reading about it and mentally preparing yourself now, so that when you're older, you'd be confident about surviving alone in the woods. Another thing I might try if I were you is talking to maybe a science teacher at school or some other relatively trusted authority figure about the idea of mounting a nighttime expedition into the woods. Sometimes just involving other respected adults can wake your parents up to the fact that you're very serious about this subject, and they might get off their butts and help you out themselves, if for no other reason than just to keep strange science teachers out of their woods at night. Good luck, and please don't get yourself killed by the Yeti. It's hard to find good listeners. Dear Scary Stories, I have a recurring dream, one in which death itself appears in the form of a dog man. It wears a cloak and carries a scythe. It appears at the foot of my bed and the hood falls backward, revealing that it has the head of a ferocious, angry dog. Suddenly the dog is in my face, snapping at me, and I wake up screaming. It's not sleep paralysis because I am able to move and I am able to scream. I wake up my girlfriend and sometimes I wake up the downstairs neighbor who bangs on the ceiling. I'm told I scream things about the Japanese attacking Pearl Harbor, which is strange as I never remember seeing war imagery or imagery of Hawaii. I only see the dog man standing at the foot of my bed representing death itself. Do you think that this is a sign that dogman or dogs will be bad luck for me? Should I sell my dog? I'm afraid to pet him because of the dreams. This really has me a nervous wreck and it's affecting everything, even my job. Do you have any advice? Signed, Dogged in Dogtown. Dear Dogged or Dogged, I'm not a trained mental health physician, so I'm probably not the person you should be asking for advice about your dreams or about why you don't want to pet your dog. The only things I could suggest would be the things anyone you know might suggest. If you're drinking caffeine or smoking cigarettes, maybe try lightening up on them a bit, if that doesn't make you more anxious. If you've been listening to a lot of scary stories about Dogman, maybe take a week off and go watch comedy videos for a while. Whatever kind of comedy is funny to you and makes you laugh. Another thing to try to do would be relaxation audio and video. If you have nature near you, maybe go sit in the park or near a waterfall or a stream or a public fountain. If you don't have access to anything like that, Watching the clouds in the sky can be a very relaxing and centering activity. Whatever brings you out of your mind and out of your worry and back into the present moment of your actual life is probably a good thing. The only time you should be worried about Dogman is if you see, hear, or smell a real Dogman. As long as it's something in your mind, as long as it's not in your physical presence, then you have permission to not be worried about it. This goes for everything else in your life that worries you too, from Bigfoot to your taxes. Don't worry about the bear chasing you until the bear is actually chasing you. Otherwise, you'll be dying 1,000 deaths instead of living your life. Trust me, it's gonna end bad for you. You're going to die in the end of your story. So there's plenty of drama and misery coming for you to wallow in when the time is appropriate, if that's what makes you happy. In the meantime, let's all help each other to have as much fun as we can for as long as we can until the inevitable sad ending arrives. The Hulking Swamp Booger, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Hi, I live in the area near Fouke, the home of the famous Boggy Creek monster. There was an area of swamp that we had an eccentric uncle living in that I visited a couple of times when I was a kid. I was looking at Google Maps to try to find the exact location to tell you, but I couldn't find anything that looked anything like what I remember in the area I thought we were in. Nobody from my family is alive except for a few people I won't speak to, so I have nothing to go on but my memory. I was thinking that this occurred near Boggy Creek and that in fact maybe what we saw was the same thing as what they saw. But either this happened in a different location, or maybe the site of this event has since been developed and no longer looks like it did back then. I'm certain that it had to be in that general area of the country though. I was very young, maybe 5 years old, maybe 4. That's why my memories are a little jumbled on this, and it's possible I'm mixing 2 or more events from my early days together into this one monster story. Nevertheless, to the best of my memory, we parked our trailer offside a highway near the swamp my uncle lived in, and my mother set up to make some dinner that we would carry through the swamp to his home and all eat over there. My father took me, and our job was to go through the wet woods and alert our uncle that we were there and about to bring dinner. That way we could stop him before he gutted a fish or skinned a possum for dinner. He was always telling us that one day he was going to cook us a meal made entirely from things he killed in that swamp, and I kept hoping that day would never come. I had no idea that the frozen food my mother made was also created from dead animals. I was 4 or 5, remember. So, my father and I walked hand in hand through the trees, following the beaten-down dirt path between the tiny lakes and ponds and the huge old trees stretching far overhead, blocking out most of the sky. Suddenly my father stopped and went rigid. I asked him what was wrong, and he shushed me angrily. My feelings were hurt, and I remember how it stung that he glared at me that way. He found me an annoyance because something was happening that he found threatening, and he thought I was going to get him killed. That meant we were in deep danger. Something bad must be happening. I remember not being able to see anything, and I remember my father's hand holding mine got very, very hot and very, very wet. And that scared me because it meant that he was scared. I remember thinking that I didn't have to cry just because I felt like crying. It was the first time I let myself cry inside but hid it from the world. I wanted to go back to the trailer, but I was not going to say that out loud. The memory of my father's hurtful glare reminded me that if I spoke out loud, I could get us killed. Killed by what? My father grabbed me and pulled me into the bushes where we hid, crouching behind a large boulder. My father looked at me seriously and put his finger across his lips in the shh symbol. But he didn't have to tell me. We hid there and waited. Then I could feel it. From our right, and I guess from behind us, I could feel it. Boom. 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 Someone large was walking up slowly. It sounded like the fat guy who lived upstairs from us at home, walking around in his underpants upstairs, making our little chandelier rock back and forth, dropping dead bug carcasses on us while we ate dinner. Only whoever this was seemed even heavier than that guy upstairs. As whoever this was got closer, the tears were streaming down my face and my mouth was basically screaming in silence. I was in utter agony and fear, wondering who was going to walk past and if they were going to notice us. So, this thing walks right past us, and we bounce with each step it takes. When it passes us, it is from our right and behind, going toward our left and in front, so it's facing mostly away from us. We can see it from behind, but at least so far, it hadn't seen us. Now I say it because this was not a human. It was, as you would expect from the heavy footsteps, something much larger than a human. It was not a bear, that much is for certain. It was something that seemed to have a butt like a human being or an ape, but it did not walk like either a human or a primate. It did not stoop forward, for one thing. Its shoulders sloped, but to the sides. It kind of gave the impression of a very glum, sad giant. Like it had the posture of a depressed person with shoulders hanging down, but the walk was straight and sure, almost robotic. I'm not sure what my father saw as he left us years ago, and I have to remember that my memories are from when I was a young child, and they might be distorted. But that is what I remember seeing. It was like a man, but not like a man. It was hairy like an ape, but it didn't walk like anything I've seen since. When I say it walked robotically, yes, I do mean I have wondered a lot if what I saw was a robot, as crazy as that sounds. I also have wondered if it might be some entirely other kind of prehistoric animal or modern descendant of a species that we thought was extinct. Like maybe it's not a primate at all, but some kind of out-of-place marsupial? Or what if it's a giant ground sloth? At least we know those did actually exist in the past, so there's at least some logic in proposing something like that as a possible explanation. After the creature had passed us, my father put his hand over my mouth and carried me back to the trailer, where I finally had myself a big old cry. Mom asked what was going on, and Dad told her something about how we got there too late in the day and we had to split. When I asked him later what we saw, he just told me it was a big old swamp booger. I would try to get him to talk more about it. He just thought I was crazy. What in hell else you want to know about a swamp booger except that he's a swamp booger and you better give him plenty of space, he asked me, incredulously. Life was simple for my father. You learned about what you liked. You shunned what you didn't like. It explains a lot about his child-rearing technique as well. He didn't like me, so he probably knew less about me than he knew about the swamp booger. Still, he saved my life that night, giving me the chance to grow up and criticize his parenting techniques. I wouldn't be here without him, although really this was the only time we ever bonded in any way. I guess what we saw must have been Bigfoot or a Sasquatch, whatever that ends up turning out to be, if we ever find out. It was a horrible, nightmarish experience, and I don't want to think about what might have happened to me if my father hadn't been there to protect me. But at the same time, I feel I owe the Sasquatch a debt of gratitude. It was his hulking presence that night in the swamp that forced my father to demonstrate publicly and to all the world that he did actually care if I lived or died. And for that, I will always be thankful to that hulking old swamp booger. Caveman in the Pantry, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. I have a story that's strange and very short. When I was young, maybe 8 or 9, my mother dropped me off at our former neighbor's house when she went shopping in our old neighborhood. See, we used to live next door to this lady, so we were familiar with her. Whenever I would get to stay at her place, she would let me watch whatever I wanted on television, which my mother never did. And she would let me help her bake some sweet treat that we'd share before I left. Going into her pantry to choose what thing to bake was always one of my favorite things to do when I was a kid. Until, that is, one day when she pulled the curtain back in the doorway to her pantry, and there, in real life, stood what I can only describe as a caveman. It looked exactly like a caveman from a Hollywood movie. It had wild, unkempt hair, a low brow ridge, a crazy beard, and I think it was even wearing some kind of an animal skin around its bottom. I remember it being filthy, covered all over in dirt. It screamed, and we screamed back, and it screamed louder, and we ran. I remember running into a closet and hiding, crying until our neighbor found me later. The caveman broke a few things, and there was a bit of a mess, but he made it out the back door of the house and he was gone now. We never got to bake anything that day, and we never understood how the heck a prehistoric caveman came to be standing peacefully in her pantry as though he was just waiting for us to pull the curtain back. I mean, he was making no noise before we went in there. There was no other way in there except through the kitchen, so why didn't we see him walk in there? And how could he have even gotten into the house, since all the windows and doors were closed and locked? It's a mystery that she and I never solved, and in fact, she asked me not to speak about it to the other adults. She didn't have to explain why, and I honored her request. It's still the strangest thing that ever happened to me. To this day, every time a curtain gets drawn back, my heart skips a beat, wondering what's going to jump out from behind there. Sasquatch and UFO interrupt camping, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, this story happened to me in the early 1990s when my girlfriend and I were on vacation in the Pacific Northwest. As you might guess just from the setting, this story does involve a Sasquatch or a Bigfoot, but it's mainly a story about a UFO that kept buzzing us and bugging us all night this one night. Okay, so we had a Honda Accord and we put our camping gear in the back and drove out west, camping in various places along the way. Everything was normal and we had no trouble the entire trip, which had us in a kind of very innocent, blissed out state. That was about to change. We decided to camp out near Mount Shasta. The weather was warm and dry, which you can't always count on over there. We had begun talking about the trip back and places we wanted to see going back which we had missed on the way here. I noticed my girlfriend looking over my head at points and to the left of me at others. I wondered if there were a mosquito there and I swatted at the air. She said, "No, I'm looking at that weird plane in the sky." I turned around and there was a light off in the sky a little bigger than the stars. "I think that's Venus," I told her, then flirted about how that star was named after her. She rejected my flirting and said Venus didn't move all around. I looked back and although it seemed to be in the same place, the light seemed somehow larger or brighter. As we talked for a while, I began to notice our surroundings seemed to be getting better lit. Sunlight wasn't for another 7 hours at least. I looked up and that light had gotten as big as the moon. My girlfriend was convinced it was coming for us, and we both put out our campfire, packed up, and got in the car, not sure where we were going to head to. We drove just to get away from it, just to get away from that light in the sky. It seemed to be following us, but it's really hard to tell that kind of thing with an object that high in the sky. It could be an optical illusion and not really following you at all. At least that's what I kept telling myself and her. After a long time, my girlfriend gasped and said it flew away. She said it just sped off in a second and was completely gone. I asked where it went and she just said, "Away." We drove for a while and passed a sign for a camping area with public restrooms. I asked her if she wanted to set up camp there and hit the hay. She was pretty distracted but said okay. It was not to be because I swear to you, as we pulled off the exit toward the camp, there was a huge, as in giant, dark man standing under a tree alongside the road. I didn't just slow the car down, I stopped it. It's a good thing there was no traffic behind us at that hour of night. I was looking right at something that was too tall to be a man. But it was shaped like a man, not a bear. Its arms were too long to be a bear's arms. If that wasn't a Bigfoot, then it had to be a statue of a Bigfoot. Could that be what it was? A statue or a cutout of a Bigfoot? It was hard to tell. It was so dark, and whatever the thing was stood absolutely still. I sat there with my girlfriend, car engine running, not moving. And then, that statue took a step toward us. I turned that wheel to the left and I hit the gas. We rode up onto the grass alongside the exit ramp and made it back onto the highway and away from that giant hairy man. We just drove to the nearest motel so we could sleep with a roof over our heads. When I tell this story, people ask me about missing time, and to be honest, we never thought about that at the time. I mean, we were pretty tired the next day, but that was to be expected. I'm not sure if we got to the motel in a normal amount of time or not, since we were not traveling in an area which I was really very familiar with. I know if I did experience it, I would probably not want to remember it, so I would not want to be hypnotically regressed or anything like that. I do feel in my heart of hearts that the Sasquatch we saw had something to do with the light in the sky. We did not see them at the same time, but it was on the same night, and I've never seen anything weird like that ever since. As far as I know, my ex-girlfriend never saw Bigfoot or UFOs again after that either. So the two things seem as though they must have in some way been related. I almost wish the men in black had visited us afterward. I would probably have had more questions for them than they had for me. As it is, that was the most confusing and frightening night of my entire life. The Steps in the Forest, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. This is one of those stairs in the woods kinds of stories, but it's probably not as wild as most of them. The stairs aren't clean and out of place. They're old and weather-beaten. They aren't fancy. They're ordinary. They don't look like they belong in a grand mansion. They look like they were put in place for a utilitarian purpose. But that's where these stairs get weird. They don't really seem to lead to any place. Go up the stairs, and you're almost immediately met by impenetrable overgrown forest. And the hill they're built into seems easy enough to climb without the stairs in one step or two. I used to like to sit there when I wanted to be alone because it seemed like sort of a place of mystery to me. It almost felt like steps leading up to the Fairy King's invisible throne. I wondered, had there been a building there at one time? Or had there once been a path through the trees here that has become overgrown from lack of use? If so, where did it lead? I realize I could probably just go online and check satellite photography, but somehow I don't think that would take away any of the mystery of that place from me. So, one day I was walking to the spot because I wanted to find a solitary place to meditate for an hour, and I came across a small building. There were steps leading up to the small building. Were those my steps? They sure looked like them, but they were in better condition and varnished or painted with some kind of finish. They looked brand new. The small building was painted white with red trimmings. The white parts shone in the sun and nearly blinded me. There was a window with a sign over it reading information. The window had a shade drawn on the inside. I guess it was an information booth, but it was closed. Information is exactly what I felt I needed at that moment. Clearly I had gotten turned around. I thought I was heading to my stairs, but I headed to these stairs instead. Turning around, I retraced my steps back, and halfway there I was certain I hadn't been lost. Someone must have put up that information booth in the last couple of days since I had last visited. Those were my steps. Laughing at my confusion, I turned back around to check out the new information booth and see if I could find out what info they were dispensing there. Well, now I was thoroughly befuddled, as when I returned to the spot, it was back to looking like it had always looked before. No information booth, no fancy shiny varnish on the steps. I was as confused as I'd ever been, and more than a little frightened. I wasn't thinking I was time traveling or anything. I was doubting my sanity. I was wondering if I was losing control of my senses, and that is a frightening thing to be worried about. I sat down on the steps and tried to meditate, but the experience had shaken me up too much, so I went home after a while. After taking a nap, I woke up with the idea of contacting a local historian that I know and asking her if she knew about that location and what used to be there. I had gotten the notion in my head that I had seen a ghost building, something out of the past. If that were true, I was still dying to know what kind of information the booth used to dispense. So I got her on the phone, and she told me that her family had in fact built that little staircase. It was not the steps leading up to an information booth, however. Her brothers had built the staircase because it led to a path in the woods leading to their family home. It was to help their mother make the trip to the store after she had entered her later middle years and allow her a little bit more independence. There had never been an information booth or any building of any sort on that platform above the stairs, but the path through the woods had once been clear-cut and easy to walk. I thanked her for the information, and I guess it's irrefutable, so now I know for a fact that I did not see a ghost building that day. I did not see something out of the past. So, what did I see? The stone that wasn't a stone, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, have you ever heard a Dogman story that also involved the Men in Black? Well, that's what happened to me, and I'm going to tell you about it. Yes, I saw a Dogman. There's not much more to say about it than that. I was driving to work in the early morning on the highway, and there was a partition between the two sides of opposing traffic. There was this creature there on the grass in the middle of the highway. It had long, tall ears on top like a jackal. I had first thought it was a kangaroo, but it was too dark to be a kangaroo. The sun was already high enough in the sky that I could see with some detail. It was eating something, and it wasn't eating a carrot. It was definitely a carnivorous predator or scavenger. I felt a sense of revulsion and abhorrence that I never felt for any living creature before. It felt noxious and wrong. It felt like it shouldn't be there, and in fact, it shouldn't be anywhere. This was something sickening that shouldn't even exist. And yet there it was, feasting. After driving past it, I couldn't bear the idea of working that day any longer. I phoned my boss and I told him I had to rush home. I was sick suddenly while driving to work. He was understanding about it, probably because he could hear my voice. He knew I wasn't kidding. I got off the next exit and took a different route home. When I got there, I was surprised to find my wife and daughter had left for school already. They usually were there for another half hour. I kicked off my shoes and headed straight for my bedroom. I had a Dogman hangover and sleep seemed to be the only cure. And so, as you might expect, the doorbell rang. When I went to answer it, I was very weirded out to see it was 3 guys in black suits. It was full daylight, but they still seemed intimidating. All 3 of them wore dark, reflecting sunglasses. One of them was larger than the other 2, and he kept looking all around constantly. The other 2 were staring directly at me through the glass. I really didn't want to open the door, but I did. They explained they were from the Air Force and showed me some kind of ID. Might have been from the back of a cereal box for all I know. Idiotically, I let them in. The third one stayed where he was and kept looking left, right, up, down. When the 2 men walked into my house, they stopped in unison and stared at my feet, which I now realized were bare since I had taken my shoes off when I came in. The 2 of them looked at each other and just stood there staring at each other for a while. Then, again, in unison, they both kicked their shoes off and we all walked into my home together barefoot. We sat at my dining room table and they spoke to me in a most reassuring fashion. They told me that they knew what I had seen and they were very sorry for what had happened. They asked me politely if I would choose the patriotic choice and not tell anyone about the encounter. I told them that was fine by me since nobody would believe me anyway. That seemed to foul up their internal computers or something because they both stared at each other again. It was like they were communicating silently. Then at once they both insisted that people would believe me, hence it would be more patriotic for me to never mention the sighting at all. I laughed, and the one of them seemed to get really set off by that. He stood and insisted strongly that none of this was a laughing matter and that I was behaving in a most suspicious and unpatriotic manner. I found myself wanting him to stop being so angry, so I told him most seriously that I would keep the Dogman story secret to myself in the name of patriotism. They looked at me, then at each other for an even longer time than before. Finally, they stood and left my house without saying another word. I followed them out and saw them get into a black limousine and drive away. The limo had no license plate, at least not in the back. I couldn't see the front from my angle. I am 100% certain that whoever those 3 guys were, they were not from the U.S. government, but I don't have a single guess as to where they were from. So you would think that was the end of the story, except this spring I got all ambitious with gardening. I guess I'm getting older. I now find gardening as fascinating as I once found single-shooter video games. So anyway, I decided to cut the hedges away from one of the sides of our house, and I found the strangest thing. It was this rock. Like a stone? Except it's not a stone, it's artificial. I tried to dig it up, but it seems to be attached to a metal pole or cable that goes more than 2 feet deep. I know because that's the deepest I've dug around it so far. Now I'm a little afraid to even go near it. I might electrocute myself or something. It's clearly a device, and the only ones who could have put it there would be those men in black. There are stories of these space aliens or interdimensional people using devices that make humans sick through radiation. Maybe I should get a Geiger counter and check the levels around that thing? I'm thinking that I should call in an expert, but who is an expert on fake rocks permanently attached to the side of your house? The U.S. Intelligence Service doesn't usually make house calls. Well, okay, I guess they do, but not when you want them to. At any rate, I'm looking to sell this place and get out of here. I might move to a more populated location. At least then, I won't be the only one getting spied on. I have to say, the artificial stone freaks me out even more than the initial visit of the 3 men. And you know what else I don't understand? What the heck any of this has to do with the Dogman? The voice from under the stairs, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, when I was a kid, we would sometimes stay at my Aunt Esther's house in the suburbs to get away from city life during the summer. The first night my parents would sleep over and then they would leave after breakfast and we'd play there for a week until they came back the next weekend to pick us up. I remember the first night we were ever there. We were getting ready for bed and I was ready first, so I was downstairs hanging with the adults while everyone else brushed their teeth or whatever it was. The adult conversation was boring me, but I could hear another conversation taking place under the staircase leading up to the bedrooms on the second floor. I went and put my ear on the wall, and then I was certain there were 2 or 3 men having a conversation about something. I felt like I could almost make out what they were saying, but never quite. Eventually, my father noticed my ear pressed to the wall and asked me what I was doing. I said to him I could hear talking in the wall, and he told me it was the people who lived downstairs. Oh, well that explained it. I didn't know my aunt had tenants downstairs. Mystery solved. I went to bed. The next day I was talking with my aunt after breakfast and I mentioned the people who lived downstairs. She seemed confused and asked me if I meant back at home where I lived with my parents. I said no, the people who live downstairs here, the people who I could hear talking under the stairs last night. She gave me quite a strange look, then took me by the hand and led me to the basement door. Opening the door, she turned the light on by pulling a string and I saw an old wooden staircase that seemed hand-built and unsteady. It led down to a basement with a dirt floor. There was one tiny ground-level window letting in a little bit of light through its dirt-covered glass panes. I could practically hear all the spiders there must have been down there. I shuddered and backed away from the door. Nobody lives downstairs here, my aunt informed me, chuckling. It wasn't until the next day that my aunt showed me that there is in fact a room under the staircase and the entrance to it is in the back of the pantry in the back of the kitchen. She just had some old boxes stacked up in there and wasn't using the room for anything else. We went inside and she theorized that maybe my brother and sister were getting ready for bed upstairs and were talking to each other, and it reverberated through this room, and that was what I heard. I had to admit it was very echoey in that tiny space, so I figured the mystery was solved until the Friday before my parents were due to come back. Everyone except me went into town to get groceries. I stayed home because I was watching a scary old Vincent Price movie on TV and I wanted to see how it ended. It turned out I wouldn't find out anyway because a flash thunderstorm hit and the electricity on the entire block got knocked out. My family was stuck in town in the lightning storm having lunch and waiting for it to let up a bit so they could come home. They had no idea I was in a blackout. I felt panicky at first, but then I realized everyone would be home in an hour or two max and I should probably just go find some candles and chill because it was probably going to just be a matter of waiting. That relaxed me and I was placing candles around to light the main room when I could have sworn I heard someone talking. I was excited my family was home and ran to the front door, but there was nobody there. From the front door, I could hear that the talking was coming from inside. It was coming from the room under the staircase. I tiptoed over to the wall and put my ear to it. For certain, it was men talking once again. And once again, I couldn't make out what they were saying. The difference was that this time, I knew how to get inside that room. I went to the kitchen, and I grabbed a flashlight and something or other to use as a weapon. Then, without any delay or ceremony, I kicked open the pantry door and I charged on through the second door into the room under the stairs, in which I found just those boxes that my aunt had stacked there. Nobody talking. I listened and I couldn't hear it anymore. I wish I could tell you what was making the sound, but that was the last time I ever heard it. I guess I can be certain it wasn't made by my brother and sister, but that's about all I can say with certainty. Nobody else but me ever noticed this phenomenon, so I guess it might be chalked up to my imagination when I was a kid. Except to me personally, that explanation does not hold water. I know what I heard. I just don't know what was making it happen. There has to be some real, scientific explanation of what happened to me and what I heard. I've never heard strange sounds again since, so it has to have been something real. My ghost was in love with me, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. The title of this story might make it sound like a 1960s sitcom, but having a paranormal or supernatural entity attach itself to you and think it's in love with you can be a very unpleasant and frightening experience. When I was a teenager, my parents moved out of the city into the country, which was traumatic enough for me at that age. But the house they chose to move into had a female ghost who became very possessive of me very quickly. We called her Mary, although my later research turned up a death certificate for a girl named Nellie who died in this house of pneumonia when she was 17. If the entity that haunted me was actually the spirit of a dead girl, it seems most likely to have been Nellie. But I don't know if that's what this spirit was, and I don't want to make any presumptions. I'd rather try to stick with the facts, even though they don't really lead us to much of anywhere in this case. So, when I would bring girlfriends home, or even friends who were girls that I was not dating, strange things would begin to happen. Their personal belongings would go missing and turn up later in the car or in the refrigerator freezer. One time, one of my girlfriends seemed to trip on the staircase, and she said she felt someone push her on her shoulder. If she hadn't been able to grab the banister, she might have fallen and really hurt herself. One time, I was dating a girl who fancied herself a psychic. She seemed most certain that this was a female spirit who felt bonded to me. One time, she slept over, and in the morning, she was in the bathroom, and I heard her scream. Racing in, I discovered her seeming very traumatized, looking all around her. She said that she looked in the mirror and saw a cadaver standing behind her, the body of a dead girl reflected in the mirror. She and I didn't see each other too much longer after that. I wish I had a big climactic ending for this story, but I went away to college, and during that time, my family moved to a house in an entirely different state. We haven't heard from the jealous ghost girl since, although a lot of my stuff has been put in storage, and my friends here at school are warning me that she might be attached to some of my old belongings. My inclination at this point is to leave most of them in storage permanently, because life is a lot more fun when you don't have a jealous, invisible girl messing everything up for you. I saw a snake with arms, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. Dear Scary Stories, I was camping in Indian Springs Campground in Texas, and I was wandering through the trees next to there. I'm not really clear if that's their property or what, but there's a forest right near there. So I was wandering through the woods, and I saw a bird on the ground messing with a bug or a worm or something in the dirt. I didn't want to disturb the scene, and I wanted to get to watch a minute of that bird's life, so I ducked behind a tree and I remained as silent as I could, watching with great interest as the bird went about its business. All at once, and I'm not sure if the bird was more shocked by this or me, but all at once a snake hurled itself from a tree branch overhead and tried to grab the bird with its arms. This snake had arms, like little green clawed human arms essentially. I don't know if they had 5 fingers, it might have been 3, but they were hand-like claws at the end of thin arms. I shouted out in surprise as I saw the snake pouncing. I think my shout frightened the bird and it took off flying just before the snake could grab it, and all it ended up with in its claws were some feathers it had grabbed from the tail. The closest I can compare this snake to is, imagine a rough green snake that grew to like 4 or 5 feet long and had clawed arms in front. Or maybe imagine a dinosaur on top but a snake on the bottom. That was what I saw. I beat it out of there before the snake came after me, and I never went back in those woods again. The ghost led us to a hidden passageway, as told to and read by Peter Bernard. My wife and I moved to an old house, a mansion really, by the coast up in Maine. For the most part, it had been refurbished and modernized, and we were in no way roughing it there. This was about 10 years ago. We had only been married 2 years, we didn't have any children yet, and we were both obsessed with our own separate careers, which had allowed us to purchase a big house before either of us were 30 years old. You get the picture, 2 self-absorbed, career-minded yuppies, unappreciative and even unaware of all the history surrounding them. So one night, my wife and I were taking some time off and actually paying attention to each other. We got frisky and my wife slapped me on the butt, squealed and ran out of the room. I knew that meant she wanted me to chase her and tickle her. That's her thing. When she's in a playful mood, she loves to be chased and tickled, so you can imagine my surprise when I raced out of the room and ran straight into her back as she was no longer running. She was standing still in the hallway, blocking my path. Curious, I glanced over her shoulder to see what she was looking at. There was a man. There was a man in our second-story hallway. "Hey!" I shouted angrily. "Who the bleep are you?" I demanded to know, except I didn't say bleep, as you can imagine. The man ignored me. I now considered trying to subdue him, and I sized him up. He was facing away from us, but I could see he was my height and broad-shouldered. He was wearing a long black coat, black pants, and black shoes. He was a Caucasian man with dark hair, not young, not old. Older looking than I was at the time, but he looked like he might be able to take me in a fight. He was walking away from us slowly toward the wall at the end of the hallway. I shouted again, demanding to know who he was and what he was doing there. He didn't seem to hear me, and he turned to his right, and he walked right into the wall. My wife screamed in complete panic, and I have to admit I felt like doing the same. My legs felt like rubber bands from the shock of what I had just seen, yet somehow I propelled myself to the spot where he had disappeared and felt the wall. It sure felt solid. I didn't see any openings there. You have to understand, this did not look like a ghost. It looked like a guy in a long black overcoat in our hallway. And then he just walked through the wall, which I was now touching with my fingers, trying to see if I could slip through it somehow as well. My wife came over and started knocking on the wall. It sounded hollow in the area he had walked through, as though there were an empty space behind it. We knocked other places and did not get that hollow sound. There had to be an opening in the wall somehow. I pushed and tugged in various spots until we both noticed that part of the wall seemed to be separating slightly from the other part. This must have been a sliding door at one time, we could tell. It was sealed up now. We'd have to tear the wallpaper off to open it, but there was definitely a sliding door at this spot in the past. That was when my wife and I first realized that what we saw could very well have been some sort of shadow or reflection from the past. It seemed like a recording of an event because whoever it was didn't seem to hear anything I was shouting at it. As soon as business hours started the next day, we were on the phone with the real estate lady who had sold us the place, asking more details about the history of the mansion. She seemed surprised that we were interested. She said she tried to tell us these things during our first tour of the house, but we just ignored her and kept staring at our phones. She asked me why we were interested now. I didn't want to tell her because I didn't think I believed in ghosts back then, and I was very concerned at that age with being taken seriously. So she asked me outright, "Did you see it?" "Did I see what?" "Did you see the ghost?" she asked. I dropped all pretenses and told her yes, and asked her why she hadn't warned us we were moving into a haunted house. She laughed and laughed, enjoying my misery. Then she told us that the sealed-off secret passageway used to lead to underground tunnels and storage rooms, then onto the beach, where cargo used to be unloaded from ships and loaded into the house. No great mystery, really, just tunnels and rooms that no longer served any purpose. She said that the old master used to keep the hallway door slid open most of the time and would walk to and from the storage rooms himself to personally choose his wine and vegetables. That was all we had seen. It was nothing to be afraid of, she assured me. As long as the master has access to his wine, she said, he won't come and haunt you in your bedroom at night. Then she cackled heartily at our expense and hung up on me. My wife said she heard the old man walking around upstairs a couple of times when I wasn't home, but neither of us have ever seen him again. It became a funny story to tell guests who would visit. I guess he just showed himself to us that first time to say hello or to let us be aware of his continued presence in the home. Then he never felt the need to manifest in front of us again. We stayed there around 3 more years, and although it was one of the most lovely homes I could ever imagine staying in, I have to say I felt a huge sense of relief, like a weight had been lifted off my shoulders when we finally got to move. The entire time I was there, I felt like something was tapping into my energy and I was never at full power. I don't think the ghost or whatever it was intended to do harm or evil. I think it just sucked up the energy of my wife and me so that it could continue to exist. Although I don't think it meant any harm, I'm glad to be away from the ghost of the secret passageway.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
Pukwudgie gang attack. Back 10 years ago when I was in high school, I had my first car, an antique Nash Rambler I had restored from junk parts. Since I had taken the initiative to build it myself, my parents allowed me to pretty much go anywhere I wanted to, and I enjoyed a lot more freedom than most other kids my age. One night just past dusk, I was driving home from Vienna, Maryland to Mardella Springs on Ocean Gateway or US 50 when my car stalled just after I got over Nanticoke River. I managed to pull off the side of the road before it completely conked out, and I got out to walk the rest of the way home, which was probably a 45-minute or an hour-long walk. It was looking like rain though, so I was hoping I could make it home a little faster than I might have normally. I was thinking about my car as I walked. I was pretty sure I knew what broke, but I also knew it would be a few weeks before I could afford to buy it. I might get lucky at the junkyard. I decided to go to the junkyard first thing in the morning, and maybe I could have my car running again by the afternoon or evening. I was lost in thought, thinking of ways to fix my car without spending too much money, when I felt this deep, strange feeling. It was like a serious mood shift took over the entire area. Do you know that feeling when you're a kid and you're happy, then suddenly an angry parent comes home? All of a sudden nobody is allowed to be happy anymore? This was like that. A sudden, scary shift of mood. But there was nobody around except me as far as I could see. I just kept walking, sometimes trotting. Now I saw a lightning bolt off in the distance. I counted after seeing the bolt to guess at how far away it was. I counted all the way up to 9 before hearing the thunder rolling in. Did that mean it was 9 miles away? I still had most of the walk to go. Maybe it was the coming rain making me feel so strange. I quickened up my pace and started jogging. I came to this dirt road along the highway. Could swear I heard people talking from in there. I don't know why I cared. For some reason I slowed down and looked in, wanting to see who was talking. But why did I do that? I should have run faster, not slowed down. But I did slow down. And when figures began to emerge from the darkness and come out at me, I slowed to a complete stop and just looked at them. They were tiny people, like the Ebu Gogo, like the hobbits. They were hairy little men wearing little loincloths and metal necklaces that looked like they were made out of people's lost jewelry and bits of soda cans cut in geometric shapes. I was not frightened of them at all. I remember thinking they looked like chipmunk people. I smiled and bent over, then started talking to them the way you talk to your pet cat. One of them threw dirt in my eyes, blinding me and causing a lot of pain. I have no idea what caused all the pain which ensued, since I was temporarily unable to see anything. I don't remember what happened next, but I woke up with a bad headache and my eyes caked shut with mud. When I was able to clear my eyes well enough to see, I saw that it was the early morning. I got up and began staggering home. I was picked up soon after by my mother, who had been driving around looking for me for hours. I was only able to tell her that I had been beaten up, and she drove me to the hospital. I had a concussion which messed me up for about half a year before I was really back to normal. I forgot to mention, when I woke up, my gold watch and silver ring were gone. Everything else was intact, including my cash, phone, and debit card. But then again, what use would a gang of feral hobbits have with those things? I looked on the internet to find out what these creatures might be, and I found out there are legends of creatures like this existing in this general area, or at least in the same state. The name for them is pukwudgie. I have only read a few articles online, but it seems they are known for tricking humans into wandering into the woods where the pukwudgie can have at them. What I encountered seems in a way even more frightening. I saw a gang of pukwudgie. They were organized. Their actions were not random. One of them disabled me, others attacked me, others robbed me. What I would say to you, if you live in Delaware, is this. Don't go walking alone at night along old country highways and roads. If my car broke down again and I was in that same situation, I would lock myself inside the car, get on my phone, and call for help. Then, I would remain locked inside my vehicle until help arrived. The only other bit of advice I would give is to have your camera ready in case you happen to see a strange little furry man emerge from the forest wearing my gold watch. In the description of this video, we've got a link to our new Scary Stories t-shirt. It's our classic skull logo, and it says Scary Stories underneath in the kaiju monster font. It comes in black and also black and other dark colors such as black. Good for ladies or gentlemen, hoodies too, whatever you need. Oh, I also should plug the new Those American Girls album. It's got Madeline Starr on it and Patricia Howdiggy and Colleen Great, and all the songs are written by Those American Girls. This one has no cover tracks on it. The title is Those American Girls Turn Off the TV, and you can get it from the link or links in the description. The Kentucky Sheep Squatch Goat. It's a big legend-tripping tourist attraction these days to go try and see the goat man who lives under the trestle in Kentucky. I actually saw it as a child, and I can tell you, calling it a goat man does not begin to describe this thing. It was not a goat that walked on its hind legs. It was like a horse-legged man covered in sheep wool that had a goat's head with devil's horns on top. In Greek and Roman legends, I think they were talking about these creatures when they wrote and drew satyrs and fauns. They were shown with horns coming out of their heads, little devil buds when they were young, and massive horns made for head ramming when fully adult. Sometimes they were shown with legs like an animal, and other times they were shown with human legs, but they were always a symbol of lustfulness and fertility. Not in Kentucky. This particular faun or satyr is not associated with fertility at all, but rather with the untimely demise of those who look into him. It seems people have gone up on the trestle looking for the goat man only to meet a sad end when a train goes by. There's nowhere to go up there when a train goes by. You shouldn't go there to look for the goat man or anything else. And I never did. Nobody I know ever did. But years before the legend began, as far as I know at least, I think I saw the actual goat man they were referring to in these stories. My father was driving us home from a Sunday with richer relatives in the country when our car got a flat tire. This led to my parents bickering, and I would always zone out when that happened. So while they screamed at each other, I was staring off in the woods we were stuck in. I think my parents would shout when they were scared, and that it would make them feel a little less frightened for some reason. That's just my theory. Maybe they were actually as frightened as I was to be stuck there in the middle of nowhere on a dark night. If they weren't, they soon would be. Dad was still not finished putting the new tire on when we heard what sounded like a man screaming like an idiot just inside the tree line. I mean, it sounded like a man, but nothing he said was a word, at least not in English. He just seemed to be shouting nonsense. Some of it was so ridiculous that under other circumstances I would probably be laughing at the sounds this guy was producing. As it was, I was getting more and more thoroughly freaked out. Maybe there was a crazy guy in those woods, and maybe we had somehow unwittingly bothered him. My father finished his job with lightning speed and threw the tools back into the trunk, slamming it. He got in the car and started the engine before he even had his door shut. This car needed to sit there for 10 or 15 seconds before you started driving, or else it would conk out and drop dead right there. I held my breath as my father slowly pulled away from the spot, hoping this meant we were soon going to be miles and miles away from Screamy McScreamerson out in the woods over there, but it was not to be. We were to get to meet our mystery serenader after all. As Dad pulled the car back onto the highway, a light-colored, wool-covered monster man with huge devil horns on top of his head ran out of the forest and onto the road in front of us. The car engine chose that moment to conk out. All three of us screamed at the engine and the woolly monster, which had already crossed the road and was about to run into the woods. Then it stopped and noticed us. It turned out it was just running past us. It wouldn't have even noticed us if we hadn't screamed. But we did scream. So now we had made it curious. It strolled over to our car as though we were an exhibit at the zoo, and we screamed a lot more. Dad tried to start the engine as Mom screamed at him to start the engine, which he informed her loudly he was already trying to do. The goat, sheep, devil man came over to me and we made eye contact for a long time. For some reason, every time I dream of this, the goat sheep's face morphs into the monster on the airplane wing from that old William Shatner TV episode. But that's not what it looked like in real life. In real life, it looked like the face of an insane goat. It had wild eyes and its tongue would fly all around, outside of its mouth, making ridiculous demon sounds. My father got the car started, and I watched out the back window as the goat sheep man trotted after us half-heartedly for a while, then stood there, watching us drive off, bleating nonsense at us as we departed. As far as I know, nobody in my family ever had an experience like that ever again. I've not only never seen a goat sheep monster man again, I've never seen any kind of monster, or ghost, or UFO, or anything. I think the goat sheep was real because I'm not the only one who saw it, but I can't understand how it could exist without leaving some kind of evidence behind that science could analyze. Maybe Sasquatch could avoid detection because they're a very intelligent creature, but this goat sheep man was a blithering idiot in a quite literal sense. It blithered and it blathered all over the place with its eyes looking in different directions. I think it's a miracle it can survive a day without its tongue accidentally strangling itself. But I saw it, and my parents saw it. And after we screamed a lot, it noticed us too. It was definitely something real. I guess the only lesson I learned from this experience would be this. If you see a big, stupid goat sheep man, be quiet. Maybe it won't notice you. I saw the Lake Worth monster in 2018. When I was a little kid, the big thing here locally in the Fort Worth, Texas area was the Lake Worth monster. It was our own personal boogeyman, and it came with our own personal Bigfoot, which we even had a picture of published in the local newspaper. So as a little kid, I had absolutely no doubt that all these were real creatures like any other. Back then, I still used to believe the newspapers. As you can see from the photo, the Lake Worth Bigfoot was white and shaped like a monster from the Lost in Space TV series of that era. The original Lake Worth monster that was more famous locally, though, was supposed to be a sheep man, but with goat horns and scaly skin. How a witness could tell that it had scaly skin when it was covered in woolly fur, I have always wondered. But that was how it was supposed to look, furry yet scaly. This old newspaper photo shows where the monster was allegedly standing, and the dotted line depicts the path of the car tire he allegedly threw to scare humans away from his turf. It was a local legend that lasted at least through the 70s, as we would challenge each other to drive past the area. Okay, so fast forward to June 2018, and I'm driving to visit my mom, who still lives in our ancestral home, the place of my birth. Lake Worth is located midway between the very modern city of Fort Worth and the jungle that is the Fort Worth Nature Center. Keep that in mind. There is a dense, protected forest located just on the other side of the lake that's large enough that I bet dinosaurs could survive in there. I was driving through and all I saw for miles and miles and miles was trees. Trees, trees, and more trees. And then suddenly, I saw a huge monster from a nightmare standing in the middle of the road. I had to slam on the brakes. I skidded up to the monster, slowing down but unable to stop before hitting him. The creature just reached down and stopped my car's forward momentum with one hand. It stared through the windshield at me, and I stared out the windshield at it. This was a creature who stood on his hind legs over 8 feet tall minimum. He had horns and light-colored fur covering his head and his broad shoulders. His chest and arms were mostly uncovered in fur and looked scaly, like the skin of a light-colored lizard, or sort of like the skin of a bird under its feathers, if you've ever seen that. It had hair covering its midsection, and I couldn't see below. Some of the people I've described this animal to have suggested that I saw some kind of creature with mange. They say patchy fur and scaly skin can both be caused by mange. The trouble with this theory is that the parts of this monster's body that were or were not covered by fur were symmetrical. In other words, the fur was the same on both sides of its body, which either indicates that this was how it was naturally supposed to look, or else that the Lake Worth monster had a really good hairstylist. I was absolutely terrified, not knowing what was going to happen next. The monster completely surprised me by shouting loudly right at me. Then, he sort of ran and tumbled into the bushes. He was gone incredibly quickly, and I was in shock for some time from the shout it gave just before running away. I guess the shout was meant to discourage me from following him, but he didn't have to worry on that score. I floored the gas pedal, and I got out of there as fast as I possibly could. Rather than driving home that night, I stayed over and drove back in the morning. After all, in the daylight, it's a lot easier to see the giant goat men before they end up in front of your car. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story. And now, the other all-new Dogman story, Backyard Dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I've got a story that took place decades ago when I was a kid. My family moved from Chicago to a rural area on the edge of the suburbs out in Illinois. My older brother Seth and I were excited to see so much nature, which we had only seen before in parks. There's something about real nature that's different from its manicured cousin that exists in cities, and boys tend to respond to real nature. We saved up our money to buy sleeping bags and a tent, and wanted to go camping. My father was cool with it, but our mother said no. She decided it was too dangerous and she wouldn't allow it. No matter what my brother and I said, she wouldn't change her mind. When we appealed to Dad, he totally chickened out, not wanting to get yelled at by Mom, who he was terrified of until the day he died. I once saw my father scare off a would-be burglar. He was the bravest man I'd ever seen. But he ran from my mother and her unreasonable temper like a mouse running from a large hungry cat. Eventually, Seth came up with the idea that maybe we could camp out in Mom's backyard with the expensive stonework she'd put in with Dad's savings. There still was a patch of actual grass out there, big enough to set the tent up on, and we could face it toward the forest just past our property and pretend we were free human beings for a few hours. Somehow we talked her into it and set up everything excitedly. We wanted to have a campfire, but that was out since my mother was convinced we were total idiots and would burn the neighborhood down. Dad barbecued hot dogs for us and let us melt marshmallows on sticks over the grill, but told us not to let Mom know what he was doing for us. She was upstairs watching her Disease of the Month Club movie on TV. She would always miraculously catch the latest disease and need the most fashionable prescription the next day after watching those movies. They must have been financed by the pharmaceutical industry. Mom was always the first among her friends to catch the most stylish new illnesses, and they were forever jealous of her for it, competing to be the most glamorously ill. Dad eventually gave up his freedom and surrendered back into the house to obey Mom for the rest of the night, and finally Seth and I were alone in our tent, staring out at the forest and imagining all the wild things living in there. We tried to name as many animals as we could think of that might be in that forest we weren't allowed to go in. Maybe owls lived in there. Maybe bats. Definitely squirrels. Maybe deer. We wondered if anything dangerous lived in there. I asked if a tarantula might be in there, but Seth said only if someone had a pet tarantula that escaped because they weren't from around that part of the world. So, I imagined someone's pet tarantula crawling around in there, ready to strike. We got tired after a while and Seth asked if I wanted the tent flap left open or closed. He said if we were really out in nature, he would want to seal us up, but since we were in our own backyard, we could probably leave it open. I said okay to leaving it open, but I had no idea how much I would regret that. I don't remember falling asleep, but I woke up because something was grabbing the toes of my foot. It was tickling at first, but now it was starting to hurt. I looked up and rubbed my bleary eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Some kind of hairy hand was reaching into our tent and grabbing my toes. I screamed and nudged my brother, trying to wake him up as quickly as I could. I prayed that was Dad wearing a monster glove playing a prank on us, but until I knew that for sure, nothing in the world was going to stop me from screaming. Seth got up angry and thrust his head out of the tent, furiously telling whoever it was to cut it out. He stopped talking very suddenly and withdrew his head into the tent, zipping the entrance up fast, all in the same movement. I asked him what was going on, and he didn't answer. He didn't even turn to face me for a while. I wanted to ask him again, but I knew he had heard me the first time. I was getting the distinct impression that was not our father out there playing a prank on us. Slowly, Seth turned toward me, and I could see he was trying not to look like he was shocked, but he was very shocked by whatever he had seen. "How much trouble are we in?" I asked as quietly as I could. "I don't really know," he whispered back, and that sent a chill down my spine. If my older brother was that scared, I probably should be 10 times as frightened. I whispered to him, asking him if he could tell me what it was out there when that thing outside howled. It howled so loudly that it hurt my ears. I prayed that my father would hear it. I prayed that he wasn't in bed yet. My mother kept her TV extremely loud so she could hear it over the air conditioner she slept next to, which was also very loud. My father would put earplugs in his ears to blank out all that noise so he could sleep. Mom wouldn't hear an atomic explosion outside her window, and if Dad had his earplugs in, he wouldn't either. Our only hope was that Dad was having a midnight snack or something, and that he would hear that howl and shoo off the wolf somehow. "How big a wolf is it?" I asked my brother. He looked at me like I was an idiot. "You saw its hands," he reminded me sternly. "Does a wolf have hands?" he asked. He was right. I had seen the hands. They weren't human or animal hands. I had thought they were monster gloves. But that thing howled like a wolf, although it had hairy hands. My mind spun, and I couldn't think of anything that it could be. Unless... "Is it a monster?" I asked my brother. He started to tear up. I saw tears running down his face, even though he wasn't crying. His face was turning bright red. "Yeah, I guess it's a monster," he told me. And whatever that thing was, started growling. It was pushing its hand into the tent in places, seeming to be confused by the tent material. I guess you don't run into too much polyester out in the wild. I asked Seth if that thing could get into the tent, and he asked me how would he know? Was he the expert of monsters or something? I said we should yell for Dad, but Seth reminded me of what I already knew. If Dad were coming, he would have come when that wolf monster howled. I told Seth that if we were gonna die, I at least wanted to know what did it to me, so I asked him to tell me what the monster looked like. At first he refused, but I threatened to look out and see for myself, so he tried to remember and describe everything. He said it probably looked more like a werewolf than anything else, and I told him werewolves were only in the movies. The monster outside howled again, and Seth told me I should tell him that. Either he didn't get the memo, or somehow we had gone camping in a horror movie. Camping in a horror movie rang in my head, and a hopeless feeling overtook me. I hoped this was one of those scary movies with a happy ending, but somehow that didn't seem too likely. I wanted to understand what that howling thing was, so Seth continued his description. It was like a man, he said, but covered in fur like a dog. It had a mane like a lion that was straighter and lighter colored than the rest of its fur, but it looked more like a dog than a cat. It had hands and feet like furry human hands with claws sticking out of them. We had seen the French black and white version of Beauty and the Beast, and he said it reminded him of that, but with a mane, a longer snout, and messier hair. It also seemed angry and crazy. I asked him how big it was, and Seth got fed up with my questions. "Do you want me to go out and measure it for you?" he snarled back at me. He told me to be quiet so he could think of how to get out of this situation. I quieted down and tried to think too. "I've got it," I said. "We should dig straight down, then tunnel back to the house." Seth told me he would whack me in the head for having such a stupid idea, except we might be dead soon, and he didn't want to have to explain to St. Peter why his last act on Earth was whacking a moron. I couldn't think of any way out of there, and neither could Seth. We both started praying and readying ourselves for what seemed inevitable. But after we finished praying, we realized that the growling was gone, and it didn't seem like the monster was there anymore. I wanted Seth to stick his head out and look, but he said we should wait for the sun to come up just to be sure it was really gone. That was fine with me. We both listened intently until we heard morning birds beginning to sing and saw that it was beginning to light up outside. Seth unzipped far enough to stick his head out and declared that the coast was clear. I ran into the house and woke up my dad to tell him the whole story. I didn't even care if my mother heard. I just had to tell him everything as soon as I could. Mom woke up and gruffly told us to go outside if we were going to scream. Dad came downstairs and asked Seth to explain what I was talking about. He listened and seemed to believe us. He came out with us to the tent and looked for footprints, but the ground there was hard and we saw nothing. "We think it came from the woods," I said, and we walked toward the forest, watching the ground beneath us. Sure enough, by the tree line, there was a paw print of either a dog or a cat. "Will you look at the size of that?" Dad exclaimed. It didn't look as large as the hand that had grabbed my toes, but Dad thought it was large. He may not have believed us that a werewolf was messing around with us all night, but he did believe us that some kind of large predator was. Dad told Mom we needed a fence, and of course she insisted it had to be the most expensive kind and made of stone. I actually agreed it should be made of stone and built very tall. Nobody ever used the word werewolf around Mom, and she was not curious enough to care why the fence was being built. When my birthday came around that year and Dad asked me what I would want, I sadly told him I wished we could all go camping in the wilderness together, but I knew I couldn't have that. He asked me why not. I said Mom wouldn't like it. Dad said he could make Mom like it. I didn't believe him, but he said wait and see. It turns out he paid for Mom and her sister to go to Hawaii for 2 weeks on his dime, and while they were gone, Seth, my father, and I were going to spend a week camping. It was the most awesome week of my entire childhood. We saw a bear from a great distance, which is the only way I ever want to see a wild bear. We saw a moose, and we saw lots of other kinds of animals, including deer, owls, and even bats. But we didn't see any tarantulas, and we didn't see anything that frightened us half as much as the dogman we had seen in our own backyard.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
Come back for more scary stories.